I guess what primarily do you feel like changed or that you connected with now that made this the right time to make this movie?
Well, I guess it was kind of coming out of Bloom. This seemed like a really good thing to do because it was so tonally different than Bloom. Totally and tonally different than Bloom. It was, Bloom was kind of this big, kind of intentionally messy, kind of traveling carnival of a movie, and it was just kind of, it was like a Kusturica thing of just overstuffing it with all this stuff that I love in life, and it felt, after working on that for like 4 years, it's like seeing something where the challenge of it and the pleasure of it was honing it down and getting it more sharp and getting it more kind of cut. That seemed really appealing, and just that the fact that it would be a more grounded, more gritty world. It seemed like a fun challenge. And it was also something I knew I could work with Joe on. I knew that the main character could be Joe, so he and I, we'd stayed really good friends since we made Brick, and we both wanted to work together, for a while.
Well, how intuitively do you tend to write, or did you write this? Because what I think is really remarkable about it is that as you're watching it, you really feel like there's a complete line for every character through the whole movie, which doesn't necessarily always seem to happen when you're watching a movie. You're like, oh, well, this guy kind of disappears, this guy comes back. It's like everything pays off as if you wrote like 8 stories, one for each character, and then somehow tied them together.
Oh, thanks, man. That's cool to hear. Yeah, I'm a really I'm a really slow writer, and like all writers, I kind of don't know. You don't know if you're doing it right. You just have your way of doing it, and you just kind of muddle through it. But I spend I'll take like a year and a half to write a script, say, and I'll spend the first year not typing a word, just working in notebooks and just outlining and just drawing scenes and sketches, and sometimes one line of dialogue will come to you that'll be the key for one of the characters, and structure, basically. I really, the element of bridge building, of making a script, that engineering element, is something that I spend a lot of time working on. So maybe that adds to what you're talking about. So yeah, I'll just get it planned to the nth degree, and then finally, when you do start actually writing scenes and start writing dialogue, for me, the advantage of that is I know exactly the function of each scene in the script, so I know what I want to focus it to, and also these characters have been living in my head for that long. I know what their voices sound like. So that's just the way I do it. Obviously, there's a million great ways to do it. I've heard the Coen brothers just start writing at page 1 and go to the end, and that kind of, you always kind of admire the thing that you don't do, I guess, and for me, that kind of unexpected freshness of you never know where the movies are going. You can see stemming from that, I think. But I don't know. I heard that secondhand. That might be bullshit.
Well, because you have 2 actors playing the same character at different times, how much did you sort of conceive both of those characters, I guess, or there's 2 iterations of the same character, separately and together? Because it's interesting that in the future, Bruce Willis's iteration has gone through, infinite hardships, and yet has sort of been softened by this formative relationship that he had.
Right.
And so regaining or sort of returning to the hard edge is different than this young guy who, is hardening up, sort of,
Right. Yeah, that was the real pleasure of it. That was kind of the hook. That was the thing that started it all off, was the idea of, like you say, developing 2 characters who come from exactly the same place, literally, And for me, part of the fun of developing older Joe's character was, the notion of a guy who feels like he has reinvented himself, and feels like he's redeemed himself, and feels like he's evolved beyond his younger self, and in a real way hasn't, and he's actually doing in the exact same loop that his younger self was in. He just can't see it, and so it's actually the younger self that has to kind of make that realization. And so that basic dynamic was really interesting to me, and kind of that laying forth the initial idea of the wisdom of age, and then questioning that and looking at, and seeing how that can lead to its own kind of self-fulfilling loop. So that roundabout way of answering or maybe not answering your question.
No, definitely. You know, the time travel aspect of this you've discussed for a long time in terms of just the fact that this is a time travel movie. But what's the way that it's handled in this movie is really pretty seamless, and also there is a certain acknowledgement through the film that one, like explaining it, you know, might sort of expose the movie a little too much, and at the same time, trying to actually explain it is not really going to make a whole lot of sense. You know, how did you sort of balance giving yourself a little bit of an out to go, well, if I explain this too much, then people really are going to start nitpicking, and then how much is it like, if I just sort of create this conceit, I don't really have to...
Well, it's funny. It was actually, I kind of came at it from the other end, because it was, I actually wanted to, you know, because I love time travel movies too. I'm the guy who nitpicks them afterwards. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the movie. Like, I don't know that I would understand saying, yeah, I didn't like that movie because this and that didn't make sense with the time travel. It's an entertaining film, mm-hmm. and then after the fact I say, yeah, but this and that didn't make sense with the time, you know. Mm-hmm. So, and the truth is, any movie, even the most, you know, airtight storytelling experiences you've ever had in a theater, like the first Back to the Future, or, you know, anything, even Primer. I mean, even Primer, which is one of the best time travel movies ever made, and it's just absolutely brilliant. Anything, if you dig into it, enough layers, the paradoxes are going to start adding up and it won't make sense. But at the same time, what those movies have in common, and what I really put a lot of work into doing with Looper, is creating a consistent set of rules. So creating at least some, even if it's an artificial matrix that you can dig beneath and find what doesn't make sense about it, creating that matrix of this is how time travel works in our movie. And within the contained realm of our story, we're going to stick to this. And so it was actually really important to me to do that. And I did that with this film, and that was, I spent a lot of work creating actually all these rules I stuck to. The line about, you know, we're not going to talk about this shit, that was less about covering my tracks with the time travel. It was more about just narratively realizing that that's not something we want to talk about at this point in the movie. Realizing that all the stuff that I was so precious about and like did all this work to, and that I find so interesting as a time travel geek, is not what matters to the story at this point, you know. So for me, it was much more of a storytelling thing. It's like, we don't want to stop and have a chalkboard scene right now. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's something that I guess the time travel nerd in me is afraid that that's time travel nerds like myself will hear that line and say, oh, he's just giving himself permission to be lazy about the time travel element. In reality, it's just that it's almost the opposite. It's like, if you actually are interested in time travel, you have to look at the effects of the rules and then reverse engineer them and figure out what they are, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Well, you do a great job of creating sort of set pieces in action in this movie that really comes out of story. You don't feel like they were built and then inserted into the narrative. I guess, how much were you thinking of this as even an action-oriented movie from sort of the get-go? I mean, is that because of just the idea that you had more incidental, or was it a thing where you were either testing yourself or you were directly sort of aspiring to create something that balanced like a real sense of drama and had these sort of like visceral action sequences?
It's kind of both. It's kind of both. You know, it would feel very, you know, very nice and pure to say it came all from the needs of the story. But the truth is, I did want this to be a fun, action-filled ride. That was one of the first things I told Joe when I started writing the script, and we were talking about the idea, is, you know, because the first things we talked about were all the heavier themes of it. And I said, but I don't want this to be a dirge. I don't want this to be algebra homework. I want this to be a movie that thrills you, and that, you know, you can't get up to go to the bathroom during it because you're waiting to see what happens next. So, and I wanted to do action as well. I wanted to do like those action set pieces. So, you know, obviously you only have them in there if they actually make sense for the story. But it's something I was consciously thinking. You know, I was consciously thinking of the story kind of on that level.